because we have a guest speaker, a surprise bonus for everybody. Her name is Kim Elredge. She is a best-selling author of New Frontier Publisher, Story Pathfinder, and Intuitive Ghostwriter. She specializes in helping authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs take their books from dream to reality. Kim has published 19 books on her own, and she's going to tell you how you can do it. One of the things that came up over and over as we've done this summit is somebody would come up to me afterwards and say, Ray, I have this great idea for this book. I just don't know how to get it out of me. I don't know what to do. I have one man who's been talking to me. He said, I'm on my 5th rewrite. What do I do? And so I think Kim is going to help us get through that, and we're going to find out more how she can help you. Hi, Kim. Welcome.
Hi, Ray. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting.
Oh, I'm so glad you're going to be part of our resources, and I think what you do is amazing, and it's very exciting to talk about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and why do you do it?
Absolutely. So like you said, I'm a New Frontier publisher, Story Pathfinder, and Intuitive Ghostwriter. All of that really boils down to I love helping people tell stories. And, when we think about stories, we always think about fiction, right? Well, when I work with clients, we really bring the best elements of fiction, i.e. storytelling, into their nonfiction books. And the reason this is so important and the reason I'm so passionate about this is because your message matters. And one of the best vehicles for sharing your message with the world is through writing a book. And I love to help people do this easily and with no stress. I don't use that like birthing a book metaphor because I'm not a mom yet, but that just seems like painful and messy and more painful. So I make book writing easy. No birth metaphors here.
Okay. Well, it's so funny that you bring up the birth metaphor because I was watching something yesterday, and actually it was Joel Osteen, and it was so funny because he has this big mega church in Lakewood, and he's talking about birthing birthing ourselves and how painful it is. So it's so funny that you used that today. So it's just like, oh, okay. But he was talking about finding our purpose, and that sometimes the process was challenging, because when you're finding your purpose, you can go through those moments, and it's got to be pushed out of you sometimes. So it's an interesting metaphor to use. So, all right, let's talk a little bit more about how did you get started in doing this?
I love that question. I'm one of those crazy people who knew when they were like 4 years old what they wanted to do. I didn't actually have a name. I didn't understand the idea that an author created books. I just knew that I loved story, and that was really what I wanted to do. So I have a degree from the University of Arizona in creative writing, and I really got into helping people be able to easily write their books and get them published because of something that happened to me when I was in college. We had asked the teaching assistant about the publishing process. And Ray, I'll never forget this woman, mostly because she wore the ugliest Mary Jane shoes I have ever seen. Poor thing. I'm sure she was brilliant, but I always just remember her shoes. And she really didn't want to tell us anything about publishing. Well, come to find out, she had never been published. And there was this idea in the creative writing world, especially in academia, that you don't write to be published. You don't write to share a message. You just write for the sake of writing. And while I think that that's beautiful, as if you want to be a writer, I wanted to be an author. I wanted to be published. So, I did that whole racket with the writing contests and submitting to agents, and I got some publications under my belt and realized that I was never going to be able to share my messages with the world on a larger literary stage going that route. So I'm really a big advocate for self-publishing and helping other people do the same. I believe that, this can be every bit as professional as a book that's published by a quote-unquote publishing house, but with less stress, more money in your pocket, And the most important thing is you're getting your message out to the world faster. So I really got started in all of this because I've got this passion for words and for writing and for story. And then I really focused this into what I do today because the publishing system is broken and it doesn't work. But we've got self-publishing that does work, and people need to know how to do that.
Okay, so that's what you like to share with people is the self-publishing. Do you talk about ebooks too, the difference? Can you give people a little bit of knowledge about that right now?
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the biggest myths for self-publishing is that it's somehow less professional than a traditional publishing house. And I know that there's a lot of crap that has been self-published in paperbacks and in ebooks that is just crap. And the difference there is that those people had oftentimes really brilliant ideas, but they weren't willing, like your gentleman that said he's done 5 drafts of his book, they weren't willing to do the work to create something professional. And the difference between self-publishing and traditional is traditional would never publish that. They would look at that and say, this is a great idea, but you need to do more work. Self-publishing, because it has that barrier removed, unfortunately, people just go out and push the go button. When I work with people more closely, I really help them to craft the best book possible, both in the content that's on the page and then also those technical things that nobody likes to talk about, like the formatting, the layout, the cover design, the title. And when I work with clients, I mean, I've got this client, Camden Hoke. She just published her memoir earlier this year. It's beautiful. It's getting rave reviews. And I worked with her. That's a self-published book, but I worked with her to make it wonderful.
Well, I know I was unusual because I've self-published, well, the first one's totally self-published, and it was an interesting journey, and my book is beautiful, and there's no doubt, but I learned things as I've gone along. In my second book, The Creative Activist, I actually won an award for it this year, and, again, I went in with thank you. And it's been an interesting journey because, again, there's so many parts to this that you don't necessarily understand or know when you tap into this conversation. Mine is more of a hybrid, is what I'm calling it now, because you can pick and choose whatever level of involvement you want from this publisher. And, so I found I went in, though, and I was very unusual, as she said, because I came in, I had my graphic designer design my book, the first chapter, because the words were not the only thing. The look was as important to me. The color, because it's a full color book, it had to have a certain feel for it, and so that was very unusual. And in the self-publishing world, there's a lot of people who don't work with that, and there's a lot of you can just go and do this, but then I found out, a couple of the self-publishing places, they made it so unaffordable to have a full-color book because that's not their forte. So, they wanted to say, $48 a book. I'm like, well, I can't charge people $48 a book. So it was a very, so if you can find somebody who can walk you through this process, it's amazing to have that kind of help. And I did find that with my publisher, but it was a journey of learning. There's so many parts to this, and I was surprised. And here I already written one book and published it, but taking it to that next level of getting it in Amazon and then the marketing aspect of it, because too often we write the book, and unless it's just for us, we forget we've got to market it then.
Yeah. And that's the truth when people go with a traditional publisher too. They think that they get the marketing, and you used to, but
right,
traditional
but now you don't.
publishers they're doing fewer and fewer books. People already have to have a huge platform in order for those books to
Can you explain the word platform? Because there may be people on this call who do not know what you mean. I know when I heard it, it was like, what do you mean you have to have 10,000 people? So go ahead.
Okay, no, and that's a really great question. So when a traditional publisher and an agent is looking at a book, they want to know that you already have some type of following. So examples for that could be an email list a big one, not 300 people, but like, 10,000, 20,000. They want to know that you have large social media followings, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. One of the folks that I had actually interviewed for my summit last year, her name's Jeannie Demers. She's one of the few people I've ever met who was approached by a traditional publisher wanting to do a book deal. And the truth of the matter was they actually approached her co-author because the co-author, was a college student in her late teens or early 20s. She had a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. She had a platform. That's why they wanted the book. The book's wonderful. It's fantastic. But what we don't realize is that without having built our audience, our ability to reach people, that book is not going to be attractive to traditional publishers. They're in it to make money. That's okay. So they want to know that when those books are sold, they're able to recoup their investment in creating the book. And see, this is why I like to go with self-publishing. You still need to have a platform, but you don't have to have it before the book comes out. You can create that as you're creating the book, and Amazon can help you actually create that platform when you're publishing a quality book that looks nice and you're having people buy it and having them do reviews, and you have to do so much of that marketing on your own no matter which way you go. You're right. You can't forget that it exists.
I had worked with Steve Harrison. Are you familiar with him? And he has Quantum Leap program, and he does this thing twice a year where he brings together authors and the people who can get you on the news, who are publishers, all that kind of stuff. And he kept saying your job is marketing. And when I heard that, I was like, really? And now I understand it. But at that time, I did not understand it, and it was like, oh, okay, so.
Yeah, and I've tested it with some of my books because I've got 19 that I've written and published. And yes, I've actually tested that. The books that I market versus the books that I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a once and done thing. If you want to have that success as an author, a lot of the people that I work with, because they're coaches and speakers and entrepreneurs, they want to have that book as a vehicle, but being an author isn't the only prong in their marketing.
Right. So in some cases, very much a book is your business card.
Absolutely.
Right. And that it is the entree into some other part of your life. Yeah.
Right. The ability to say I'm a published author is the thing that opens doors to other universes.
Right.
And it's less about publishing the book and making money from it, which, by the way, you can make money from books.
That's an important thing for people to hear.
Yeah, there's that myth out there that says, people don't make money from books, and it's not worth the investment. And I always really challenge people to look at that head on. If you're writing your book and you have a larger business behind it, and that book brings you in one client at $2,000, $3,000, $10,000, did you make money off of the book? Yes. But I actually make money from the sale of my books. I'll be the first to admit that, this isn't like retirement money here, but it was something that I've done once, and it continues to put money in my bank account. But more than that, because I really like to work with people who are message-driven, they really have a message to share. How do you put a price tag on the idea that somebody bought your book, read it, and it changed their life? And that, to me, is where that money conversation gets really interesting.
Right. I think that's a great way to look at it. I know that I left my book at my chiropractor's office, and one man sat there, and he just sat and read the book pretty much right through, and he went home, and he quit his job. He changed his life. He's pursuing his passion and his purpose. And, you can't put a price tag on that. It's like, oh my, wow, this man, he heard the message, he took it to heart, and that's what he's doing. So, yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. So let's talk about what prevents people from getting started with their books or in their business.
I love that question, Ray. Thank you. I discovered that there are what I call mental monsters that keep people from getting started, especially with their book. And after having spoken with hundreds of authors, I've really narrowed these down to five main categories of mental monster. And everything else that you might think is kind of an outlier still falls into one of those categories. Once you can discover and say, oh, this is just a mental monster, it gives you that ability to kind of like take a deep breath, pause, and realize that this is just a fear that's popping up that I don't want to say is illegitimate, because sometimes there's real meat underneath those fears, but it's something that you can dissect, get your monster spray out, and then move forward with.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of these monsters?
Sure. So the monster that I encounter, the first one that usually pops up is this idea that a book has to be huge. That it has to be 300 pages, that it's got to be this enormous volume. And what that's really saying is that mental monster really boils down to, do I really have the chops to write a whole book? People think book and it just seems so big. What you need to do is when you take this deep breath with this mental monster is realize that your book, the size isn't what matters. It's the message inside. And your book needs to be just as big as it needs to be to share that message. What I usually use for the monster spray with the book must be huge is one book, one topic. You want to make sure that you're laser focused in your book so you're not backing up a truck and dumping everything on people. You want to just solve the immediate thing that they have so they feel fulfilled and show them kind of the possibility of what's next. But
I know one of my favorite books that's really short is Price Pritchard, U Squared, and it's maybe 30 pages. But the message, yeah. I look at that all the time, and it's quick, it's easy, and I'll just dial in. Okay, I need a little encouragement today, and I'll look at that. So yeah, it isn't the length of the book, It is the message, and I do love what you're saying. And I know I tend to do brain dumps and want to tell everybody everything rather than that. So I know I'm that kind of person who has to dial it back because I give way too much information.
Right. And then once you realize that there's no book police out there that says if your book isn't X number of pages, it's not a real book. Once you realize that that's not true, it opens up your creativity and allows you to relax that your book is perfect, just the right size.
I love that. That's great. Any others you'd like to share?
I think that another really important mental monster that I look at all the time is kind of on this flip side. This is a very practical one that has this question that says, I don't know what to do once it's written. I don't know what to do with publishing. I don't know what to do with editing. I don't know what to do with cover. When this mental monster shows up, people just spiral up and fly off the handle. And the bottom line with this one is that it's those fear of all those unknowns, and a lot of times they're the real practical ones that keeps you stuck. This was my biggest mental monster when I first started looking at self-publishing my work, was I had something written, but I had no clue what the path looked like from written to being able to hold it in my hand and have it available as a Kindle ebook. So I just tell people, okay, take a deep breath here. Those answers are out there, and sometimes I understand that you have to have that knowledge that they're actually out there. You can't take it on faith. So my practical advice to this practical mental monster is grab your phone and set a timer for 20 minutes. And then go to the Google machine, as my fiancé calls it, And you've got 20 minutes not to discover all the ins and outs of whatever your question is that's keeping you stuck, just to know that the answers exist. Just to know that those answers exist. Then, at the end of 20 minutes, you'll understand that somebody out there has done it before. Somebody out there can guide you through this. That you're not the first person who has walked this path. When you are ready to get to that step, you can find help. And a lot of times, Ray, just knowing that those answers, those next steps exist, will allow you to calm down and get back into the creation of your book.
Mhm. I'm going to just stop you for 1 second because you've written so many books. And when you've had a block in your creative process, how have you gotten unblocked? What are some of the tips and tools that you've used?
I love that. So a lot of times this comes back to that, who am I to do this? It's the mental monster that shows up like your inner critic. And, you can tell yourself, and this is what I tell my clients, you are the sum total of your experiences, your training, your beliefs, your life. That's why you should write this book, because you're completely unique and somebody needs your message. But the tip that I used to turn off that mental monster is this. So we're going to do this together, and if you're driving, don't do this. Close your eyes. So close your eyes, take a deep breath. And I want you to imagine what this critic looks like. And it's got to, I'm not saying it's like a big check mark or a buzzer. It has to be some type of creature or human. So mine is this middle-aged, balding, fat guy who's all greasy and he smells bad and he's got a dirty suit on and this big, nasty, yucky cigar and his gut is hanging out over his pants and he comes waddling up, this, bald head, and he comes waddling up to tell me whatever. Here, so imagine your critic. Really see it in your mind. What does he look like? What does he smell like? Then you're going to enter in the picture. I want you to square your shoulders and raise your hand and get out your finger, get right up in his face, and say, "Shove off," before he even gets a chance to open his mouth. And, if you're like me, we don't exactly use the word shove off. We use a little bit stronger language. But I want you to get right up into that critic. This is why it's so important to really have a vivid mental image. And tell that critic, tell that mental monster that says, who am I to write this book, to go stuff it. And as I kept doing this exercise, I realized that critic stopped showing up. This is one of the mental monsters that you can actually get to go away and stay away in your writing. Not one of those ones that shows up with me anymore.
I love that. I know how many times I tried to write the first memoir called Survivor to Thriver, An Odyssey of Healing, years ago, and I was so excited. And this was before memoirs were very popular, especially talking about using alternative tools for healing. And I had taken my manuscript with my artwork, my poetry, my stories, everything with me, and I had gone to a personal development conference, the premier ones at the time, and I showed it to a couple of the people. And they all said to me, "Your story's not enough." And, okay, I took a deep breath and I came home, and I have a master's in urban planning, so I knew how to write a questionnaire. And, so I went out and then I interviewed, I had 150 other people respond to this questionnaire. And it really proved the hypothesis that I had gone in with, that spirituality, forgiveness, body work, things like that, which weren't being talked about at that time, were really critical for people to move from survivor to thriver. But every time I'd sit down to write that book, the voice in my head would be, who are you? Who do you think you are? And people weren't talking the way we do now. I didn't have the support system. And I think that's what's so important is finding, if you can't do it for yourself, find someone who can support you on the way. That there are people who can coach you, can be a container of support, because I never wrote that book. Now, I contributed my story to another book on Shine the Light, and I, contributed to other people's books on that particular subject, but I never published that book. And so I know how important it is to find somebody who believes in you and believes in your message, and that will help you with those voices to realize it's not the truth.
Yes. What I use with liar is loathsome individual appearing real. And in this
sort of like fear. Yeah.
Yeah. Loathsome individual appearing real. It's a liar coming to lie to you, and usually it's that own little voice in your head.
Right.
So that's why I find that, giving that inner voice, that inner critic, a physical form in your head really helps.
I always take it a step further. I tell people to actually make a collage, draw that figure, put it together, and then, you can do it, and then you can, have a dialogue, rip it up, burn it, whatever you need to do to take it further to release that piece of you.
I love that. I had a client who did that, found an image, printed it out, and then flushed it down the toilet.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So it's just taking it in a slightly different direction, but it's the same idea and concept, and I think it's really important because then I also believe in finding that inner hero. Where are you the superhero? Creating that superhero image for yourself. I have one as Wonder Woman, so.
Love it.
So what else would you like to share with people today?
Well, I just really appreciate that you had me on your call. So thank you again, Ray. And I think in closing what I'd really like to share is that something that came up from somebody that I had interviewed once that said when you don't write your book and you don't publish it, when you don't share your message, you're actually being selfish. Because there's somebody out there who so needs to hear what you have to say. And by not sharing your message, by not realizing that your message matters, you're keeping that person in pain. And so it's the ultimate act of being selfish by giving in to your fears, giving in to your mental monsters, and not getting out there. You're actually hurting somebody else.
I love that, and I've heard that too. And I think for me, writing is one form of sharing your voice. There are many others, and that was part of the reason I was having the Creative Activist Summit was to find out what your voice, finding that creative voice. It can be in film, it can be in poetry, story jams, spoken word. It can be, in theater. There are so many other forms, as far as music, writing lyrics, creating songs. And so I love that because it's for everybody. It doesn't matter what the media, it's more the message. And what you're saying is so true. It is, it is our gift to give to them, and people are hurting in this world, and they need to hear your message, and only you can deliver it in your way because no one is like you. No one has ever experienced your life and has your gifts and talents just the way you have it and can present it the same way. People hear it differently. How many times in your life, and I know in mine, it's like I've heard this person speak, and then all of a sudden there was this aha moment. It's like, oh, I got it. It just came to me, touched me in a different way.
Yep. Oh, I've had that more times than I can actually count, and it's why I like to go to, quote-unquote, the same thing, read the same books, go to the same events, listen to the same inspirational audios. And you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes with my same.
Okay, I get it. I get it.
I'm not the same person when I go to it. So I get different things or more things out of it. And
right.
Yeah, it all boils down to if those people hadn't shared their message, I would be different. And it wouldn't be the good type of different.
Right. And it begins with us because, too, when we own our stories and we learn to and I say reframe them. We all have stories of challenge and overcoming and persistence and resilience, and those are what we need in our world today. There was a story recently on about one of the Olympic swimmers that I just love. She's part of the refugee camp, and she won a gold for swimming. But her backstory was she's a Syrian refugee. She was on a boat with 30 other people. The only people who could swim were her and her sister. They literally jumped out of this boat when it started to take on water, and they pushed it for 3 hours using their gifts and talents. And I want to cry when I listen to stories like that, but that's the importance of storytelling. That's the importance of people knowing there are people doing amazing things in the world and that their gift is just what you're waiting to hear.
Yes. And before you all start thinking, oh, well, I don't have a story like that, you do.
You do. You do. And it's somewhere in your family. It's your family of origin story. I really believe that we've all, I suggest, and this is one of the tips that I use with people, is to sort of create a timeline for yourself. And you can do it with fun stuff. Pull out a bunch of pictures and remember a time in your life and start thinking about when were you brave? When were you courageous? When did you stand up for somebody else? When did you step out of your comfort zone? When did you, make a difference in somebody else's life? When did you pay it forward? And we start thinking in those terms, and we've all got stories.
Yes, and they all matter. And they all can change lives. And the first life that they change is yours.
Right. And, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So it does. And everybody is a role model. We interact with people, unless you're living on a mountain by yourself somewhere. We all interact with people, and what we bring to that interaction, that compassion, that authenticity, that integrity, that love, and we touch souls. And I believe by sharing our stories, it is a gift that we give to ourselves and to the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Kim, I loved our conversation, but we're starting to run out of time. So how can people find out more about you? And I know you have a wonderful free gift for people, too.
I do. So I actually have the ebook, which is 5 Mental Monsters That Are Keeping You from Writing Your Book. And so we really went into 2. I kind of touched on a third, but I'd love for you guys to be able to see all 5. So you can pick that up at 5mentalmonsters.com. It is free. And you're always welcome to reach out to me at newfrontierbooks.com.
Thank you, Kim. I'm so glad we had this conversation. And please, to anybody who's listening today, you have a story in you. And let Kim be your guide. And if not her, find someone who is that person who's going to help you hone in on your skills, your stories, because as she said, there are people waiting for you. Your voice and vision matter. Thank you very much. This is Ray Luskin from The Creative Activist. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.